Hello, it's Emily here at Textile Express, and I'm here to talk to you today about corduroy fabric. So we're in the dress room, so we'll be focusing mainly on dressmaking cords, ones that are the perfect weight for making things like trousers, skirts, shirts, and also children's clothing. But also I've pulled out a couple of furnishing corduroys as well to show you those. It's a really versatile and robust cloth, so it does work well for both dressmaking and also for furnishings. So we'll start off with what corduroy actually is. So it's a woven fabric. It's generally made from cotton, although you do get some cloths nowadays that are mixed in with some polyester, which can add to the strength, or even some elastane to add some stretch to them. But generally they're 100% cotton. This one that I've got in my hand now is what we call a needle cord. And then they also go up to much chunkier cords, or what you might have heard of being called a jumbo cord. So the size of the cord and where they pick up their name from all depends on the number of ridges that make up the corduroy, or what we like to call the wale of the fabric. So corduroy is a woven fabric, and it's woven in such a way that you get ridges across the fabric. So it's quite a textured fabric. And those ridges are created during the weaving process, and depending on how many ridges there are within an inch that's measured on the fabric tells you how many wales there are. So you may see some corduroys listed as 21 wale. That would mean that there were 21 ridges per inch, whereas some will only be perhaps 3 wale, so that would be a really thick chunky jumbo cord, as there'd only be 3 ridges per inch. Now you may be thinking, why is this so important? But generally speaking, the higher the number of wale, the finer the cord, and therefore the softer it is. So when you're thinking about what you're going to use the corduroy for and its suitability for the project, you may want something like a needle cord with a really high wale for doing dressmaking projects, whereas a chunkier corduroy, like these ones that we've got here, they've got a much lower wale, and they're much thicker and more suitable for upholstery and soft furnishings. So we'll start off having a look at the different fabrics that I've got on the table. I'll run through some pattern suggestions with you, and then finally I'll also give you some tips for when you're sewing corduroy fabric. So these two to my right are part of our furnishing corduroys. So we have just this one width of cord at the moment, although we are getting some more with a much chunkier cord as well, but they'll be the similar sort of quality. So generally we sell this for upholstery, although we have also done blinds and cushions in it. It comes in about 6 different colours, and it's a really lovely, robust yet soft cord. It makes up beautifully, like I say, for upholstery, or if you were doing boxed cushions or something like that. Lots of different colours to choose from, and it's a really good hard wearing cloth. Now that's actually 100% polyester rather than being cotton, but that's just going to help with the durability of the fabric because of it being used for something alternative to the dressmaking. And moving along, we've just had these needle cords in, so they're in some really pretty prints. You'll see a mixture of them here. So there's some really pretty, generally autumnal sort of colourings, as we're in October when we're filming this. But yeah, some really pretty floral designs. There's also some paisley designs too, which I haven't pulled out on the table. But all of these would be perfect for dressmaking. So they're a much finer cord, a much higher wale, and then they are 100% cotton, and then they are printed. So these would be perfect for dressmaking. They're particularly popular with making children's clothes, be it skirts, dresses, trousers, pinafores, that sort of thing. And that's just because they are so soft. That doesn't mean to say that you can't use them for adults' clothes too. They make up beautifully into shirts, dresses, skirts, or even trousers as well. They could be used. So they're just some really lovely, very fine, very soft needle cords that we've had in. And then finally, I've pulled out just a couple of colourways of our ex-designer corduroys. So these are a real mixture. There's a mixture of different wales. So just going back to that, that's to do with how many ridges there are, how chunky the cord is, but also there's a mixture of some which are 100% cotton and some have got some elastane in them. So that's just going to add some stretch, so they'll behave a little bit like, say, a stretched denim. And that can just add in with the comfort when you come to wear your items. So they're particularly good for perhaps slightly more fitted items. So you're looking at trousers, skirts, anything really where you just want a bit of stretch over the body as you're wearing the clothes. So the first one I pulled out is this 7 wale corduroy in the sage green. I just thought it was a really pretty colour. So this one is 100% cotton. It doesn't have any stretch in it. Whereas in comparison, this gorgeous orange one, which I've pulled out, so it's the burnt orange colourway and it's the Comfort Stretch corduroy. So this one has 2% elastane in it, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you'll see when I come to stretch it, there's actually a lot of give in that fabric. So that's just going to make it that little bit more comfortable for making trousers. Or skirts. I don't know about you, but I hardly ever buy trousers these days that don't have a bit of stretch in them because they are just that bit more comfortable to wear. You'll also see behind me we've got this really chunky blue cord, so that's one of the jumbo corduroys. Again, you've got a really good amount of stretch in those. And then also, this is something that you don't see very often, but this is the Pilan cord in dusky pink. Again, it's got the stretch, but you'll see that there's some variation in the ridges. So rather than the ridges being evenly spaced about, there is some alterations within the ridges. Just adds a little bit of extra interest. So we've got 3 chunkier ridges followed by more of a needle cord spacing on those, and it just adds a little bit of interest to the corduroy. So we'll move on to some sewing tips just while I've got this out, because it's very evident on here that one of the things you need to take into consideration when sewing corduroy. So corduroy fabric does have a pile similar to a velvet fabric. It's what gives it that really soft finish, but a pile does have a direction to it. So you can see some areas on this where the pile is brushed in the wrong direction. So when you brush with the pile, it'll feel nice and smooth, but when you brush against the pile, it feels slightly rough. You can just definitely tell that you're going against the pile because it doesn't feel correct and it doesn't feel as smooth. So why is this important, you might be wondering? Well, when you're cutting out either your pattern for dressmaking, or perhaps you're making cushions or doing your upholstery, you want to be making sure that throughout the entire project that the pile is running in the same direction. Otherwise the fabric can appear slightly different because it will reflect the light differently, and also it will wear differently. Perhaps if you're wearing a pair of trousers and you cut one leg with the pile and one leg against the pile, after you've been sat down you would see a difference with how it was wearing from where it had been sat on the chair. So when you come to cut out your pattern pieces, make sure that all the pattern pieces are running in the same direction. Generally I prefer to sew with the pile, but traditionally in dressmaking in particular, lots of people decided to go against the pile because they preferred the way it looked. Like I say, personal choice. Just make sure that whichever way you choose, that you keep all of the pattern pieces going in the same direction. So tip number 2 for when you're sewing your corduroy. There's obviously very distinctive grain line in this fabric. The grain line being the direction of the grain that runs through the fabric and the way it's constructed when it's woven. So on most fabrics, we try and be as careful as possible to cut with the grain line, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be very, very obvious if we're slightly off. On a corduroy, however, because it has these ridges that are produced while it's being woven, it is very, very obvious if you're not sewing with the grain line. So be really careful again when you're laying out your pattern pieces that they are lined up perfectly with the grain line on the fabric, And also when you're cutting, if you're cutting straight edges, that you're cutting straight with the ridges, and then you're not cutting and wibbling wobbling in between the ridges. This also applies when you're sewing. We'll use this Clio dress next to me as an example. So when you're sewing something like a patch pocket, it's really, really important, particularly on these side edges, that you're lining it up perfectly with the grain or with the ridges, just so that it looks all symmetrical and smart. Same again with the straps. You want it to all be running with the grain. Try not to cut across those ridges, cut with them where you can on straight pieces. So that leads me in quite nicely to pattern suggestions for corduroy. So first up, this dungaree dress that we have on my left is one of our favourites here at Textile Express. It is the Tilly and the Buttons Clio dress. So it's a fantastic easy sew dungaree dress and would work well in any of these corduroys, to be honest. It's really, really multi-purpose. If you wanted to, you could even make it in one of the furnishing cords, but obviously it's much thicker, much stiffer, so it's not going to hang quite the same as one of the needle cords, or perhaps one of our ex-designer corduroys. Sticking on the theme of the dungarees, another Tilly and the Buttons pattern is the theeron. So rather than having the dress or skirt base, these ones can be 3/4 length leg, shorts, or also full length leg. These are great again in corduroy and really nice for autumn, winter. I would probably steer away from the furnishing corduroy on this one, but they're loose fitting, so it wouldn't matter if you went for one of the 100% cotton ones, but perhaps you might prefer to choose something with a little bit of elastane in, just for that little bit of comfort stretch. But as I say, they're a very, very baggy fit, so any of the needle cords would also work, or the 100% cotton corduroys. Another pattern that I've seen used quite a few times is the Ilford jacket by the Friday Pattern Company. So that's a really lovely, it's quite similar to your classic denim jacket. Tilly and the Buttons have also just brought out a similar pattern, which is the Sunny jacket. Now, I've not sewn either of these yet, but I know that they are both really popular patterns. So both the Ilford jacket and the Sunny jacket would make up really, really well in the corduroys, depending on what sort of weight jacket that you wanted. If you're wanting something more lightweight for summer, then you could use the needle cords. If you're wanting something a bit warmer for autumn or winter, then I'd perhaps suggest going for one of the chunkier cords. And something really fun that they've done with the Tilly and the Buttons patterns on the promotional images is that they've patched quite a few different corduroys together in quite a few different colours, and that looked really cool. And then finally, trouser pattern, because there's nothing quite more classic than a pair of corduroy trousers. So two of the patterns that I've seen at the moment that have been really, really popular. One is the Closet Core Mitchell trousers, and then the other being the Merchant and Mills Quinn trousers. Now they're quite similar style, they're quite loose fitting, but then have a structured high-waisted fly and waistband. The Merchant and Mills pattern also has button detailings down here, but I just thought both of those patterns would look really lovely in the corduroy. I'm just going to finish with one last tip before I leave you all in peace, and that would just be, when you're sewing with corduroy, just be really, really careful when you come to press your fabric or press your garment at the end. Now obviously it has got a pile with a little bit of depth to it, and these ridges really don't want squishing down with some severe ironing. So just take care when you come to iron. Don't use too hot an iron, and you could also put a piece of fabric over the top just to make sure that you don't crush those ridges and crush down the pile. I hope this has inspired you all to sew with some corduroy, and I hope you found it interesting to find out a little bit more about this fabric, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.